Good afternoon. Happy New Year and welcome back. We've got a very exciting lineup of programming for you this winter. I'm Doug Marker, president of the City Club. Before we get started, I'd just like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones and other paging devices. I have several announcements to go through before introducing our speakers, so I'll work through them quickly. Next Friday forum is our regular annual economic update. We again welcome back Oregon State economist Tom Potowski to give us his economic forecast for the year to come. We've also invited two other local economists to address the national and international trends that affect Oregon's ability to thrive in the era of globalization. Portland State University labor economist Mary King will discuss what's happening with wages and jobs. Kimberly Klossing, chair of Reed College's economics department, will give us her take on the effects of national and international tax policy on corporate decisions about where to conduct business. In 2 weeks, on January 20th, Mayor Tom Potter will present his 2006 State of the City address. We expect this program to sell out, so pre-registration is open to City Club members only. Purchase your tickets in advance so you don't have to wait in line coming in. Members can call the City Club office to take care of that over the phone with a credit card, or you can purchase them here today at the registration table. We have a number of new members with us today to welcome. I want to recognize Patchen Haggerty, Dave Hepler, David Cole, Paul Johnson and Carol DeMonico, and Joseph Roby. Would you, if you're here, please stand and join me in welcoming our new members. Keep wanting to remind all of us that City Club programming is more than just the Friday program. We have a lot of member-led programming, particularly with our issue committees. Upcoming event of the Citizenship and Government Issue Committee follows up on an event from last June when Jamie Lerner, the mayor of Curitiba, Brazil, led a Future of Portland charrette with several dozen planners, architects, developers, and community leaders. Lerner's basic question was, what is your dream for Portland in one sentence? Now draw it. At the end of the day, numerous drawings, plans, scenes, and scenarios covered the walls on the 5th floor of the Wyden and Kennedy building. Many members of that Future of Portland charrette group want to continue this conversation by inviting City Club members and guests to participate. In response, City Club's Citizenship and Government Issue Committee plans to host monthly meetings beginning Wednesday, January 11th from 5:30 to 7 o'clock p.m. at the City Club Commons. The events are free and open to the public. Just a couple of other events coming up. Our new Leaders Council will tour the Port of Portland and a visiting ship on Sunday, January 22nd. Our final Friday open house will be on January 27th, and our Citizens Read book discussion group will meet again on Monday, January 30th. Obviously, there's too many events to go through in detail, but you can find the details in the bulletin or online at www.pdxcityclub.org. Our sponsors this quarter are McEwen Gisvold LLP and Medico Support Services of the Northwest Incorporated. Our sponsors make broadcast of the City Club possible, so would you join me in thanking our sponsors? To our program. Randall Edwards was elected Oregon State Treasurer in 2000 and re-elected in 2004. He served in the Oregon legislature in 1997 and 1999, and while there, he worked to create the Oregon School Bond Guarantee Act and also to enact an innovative financing plan to rebuild Oregon state parks. He also was an author of the legislation that created the Oregon College Savings Plan. As state treasurer, Edwards oversees the increasingly complex state finances. Among other responsibility, he oversees the investment of state employee retirement funds, the state accident insurance funds, and the Common School Fund. Wall Street looks to our state treasurer to make the case of how the state manages its finances when it rates the bonds issued by the state for investment. Last month, the City Club heard warnings about the United States government's deteriorating fiscal condition from Comptroller General David Walker. Walker's recitation to us of the nation's growing debt burden and deficits received national coverage. Oregon State Treasurer Edwards is in position to translate the nation's financial picture to what it means here in Oregon? Are we at the mercy of national fiscal policy, or can we chart something of our own course? And how? So welcome to the City Club of Portland, State Treasurer Randall Edwards.
So cool. Well, thank you, Doug, for that introduction. Doug and I go way back. Some years ago, we worked together in Washington, D.C., so we've come a long ways in many ways. Well, I want to thank all of you for being here, and this is a real pleasure to be before you. I'm a longtime listener of City Club, but this is my very first time being a featured speaker. And I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about what I see is important for Oregon and what our future holds. Let me first start off by saying I've enjoyed spending the last 5 years serving as your state treasurer. It's a big job. There's an enormous amount of responsibility. Basically, I'm the state's personal banker, overseeing billions of dollars of investments and multiple complicated financial transactions. What's more, I also get involved in a variety of important issues facing the state, whether it's funding our schools, protecting our environment, looking at creating jobs for Oregon. But I also have some perks. I get a nice office in Salem. I've been able to see the first Oregon quarter minted at the U.S. Mint. I've been able to engage policy discussions with people like Alan Greenspan, the head of the Fed, and Bono, the rock star, as well as an activist. But you know, one of my favorite perks has been I have a big steel vault in my office. Now, just as you would imagine, it's an enormous room-sized vault with thick doors and a huge lock. And as you'd imagine, we don't have anything in it. Today, it is empty. We do have schools that tour through it, and in fact, we had a child once lock themselves in that vault. And periodically, we put an intern in there once in a while. It really no longer serves that purpose, that is, as a safe. But to me, it's an important symbol. It's a symbol about my connection to my predecessors. You know, those guys back in the 1800s who all had beards at that time and really squinty eyes, and their portraits now hang in my treasury. But it also reminds me about my connection to Oregon and the steward, looking at being a steward for Oregon's legacy. You may not see it. Again, money almost now is all electronically transferred, but every one of us has a stake in the treasurer's vault. It's a fiduciary responsibility that I take extremely serious. It's a trust that binds me to Oregonians today and into the future. And it also guides me in every decision that I make for Oregon. I want to talk to you today about where Oregon stands and where I think we need to go. I'm proud and pleased to say that Oregon's economy is on the uprise. After some very tough times here in Oregon, things are starting to really rebound and look bullish. At the same time, I also believe we're being very short-sighted in some of the choices we are making today. We must make bold, decisive, even difficult choices and make some strategic long-term investments into our future. Let me just step back a little bit and look at when I first got elected to state treasurer in November of 2000. They were boom times. We all remember them. The national economy had had a 10-year run-up. We saw the stock market flirting with 12,000. The sky seemed to be the limit, and Oregon was rolling along with it. Most folks didn't see the storm clouds building in that horizon, though. Then everything changed. We saw 9/11, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The dot-com bubble burst. The federal deficit exploded, and the stock market crashed. Not just one downturn, but 3 downturns. That hadn't happened since the Great Depression. Here in Oregon, we were hit with this tsunami, if you will. It hit us hard. We suffered unemployment rates that were nationally the highest. Oregon's credit rating, that's Wall Street's appraisal of our financial health, took a beating. We saw our rating drop 2 points and we got a, quote, negative outlook. Now, in the midst of all this, I happened to have the opportunity to travel out to a meeting in Monument, Oregon, which is in the far reaches of eastern Oregon. A woman had set up in a motorhome a restaurant, a roadside cafe. There she was, cook and waitress, running a restaurant out of the kitchen, and had a video store and a gift shop in the 2 bedrooms. You know, I really remember this experience because when I saw that motorhome, and I don't know what the land use planning laws are out in Monument, I thought this woman is an inspiration. She is the spirit of Oregon's entrepreneurship, and I knew we would pull out of this recession. Today, at the beginning of 2006, we're seeing a solid rebound. Oregon's unemployment now is 6th in the country. We are seeing Oregon rise up out of this economic recession that hit us so hard. And by the way, we're 6th, and the state across the river, it's 8th, which of course is always great to say we're ahead of Washington in something. And at the Treasury, we're reaping benefits from some very smart policies we put in place during some very tough times. Oregon's financial outlook has now been upgraded to stable by those bond rating agencies in New York. It's not where I want it to be. It's probably not where it should be. I know it shouldn't be. But it's a positive trend. And why is this rating so important? Well, as I said earlier, these ratings are seen as a key indicator to the financial well-being of Oregon. But they also indicate whether or not we save money. That is, when we sell bonds in the marketplace, the interest rates that are charged against those bonds are determined by our credit rating. So, if we have a better rating, the cost of those bonds goes down, and we can save millions of dollars. And in fact, we've estimated that if we could get our rating back to where we were before the recession, we could potentially save $92 million over the next 20 years. That's a substantial amount of money. At the Treasury, we pride ourselves on doing business the right way, with intelligence and integrity. Here's what I mean by being smart. We now oversee a total portfolio of assets of $66 billion. The pension fund now is headed for this last year of producing double-digit returns, one of the highest in the nation. And I tell you, when it comes to taking care of your money, there is nobody tougher than Oregon in demanding accountability. If we think some outside money manager isn't doing a good job for us, we'll find someone who will. Ask those firms that do business with us. The state treasury drives a very, very hard bargain. We invest in businesses and ventures all over the globe, right here in Oregon as well. Just take one example. Through the Oregon Growth Account, we're investing in cutting-edge research in our universities throughout the state and at small, innovative companies who are trying to develop major breakthroughs in technology and research. These, we believe, will bear fruit into the next generation of economic opportunities for Oregonians. When I say we do business with integrity, I mean we're conducting ourselves in the right way, always. In my job, I deal a lot with Wall Street, but I never forget that I represent Main Street. Oregon's got clout, and we're a force to be reckoned with in the marketplace. Decisions we make here in Oregon have an impact all over the world. That's why we're taking steps to divest from companies that are doing business in Sudan, where their government is promoting genocide against its people. And that's why we're pushing Wall Street to tell the truth about the impact of global warming on the economic vitality of this country. And that's why we're fighting for better shareholder power through our proxies. Now, these are just a few examples of the way in which I'm using the pocketbook of the state to bring more accountability to both overseas and at home. And as treasurer, I'm calling for greater accountability and responsibility in the way America does businesses on many fronts, both private and public. I'm also proud to bring this tradition of protecting shareholders and citizens to the national scene, where I've now been elected to be the president of the National Treasurers Association. And when we partner With other states, we have power that you wouldn't believe, and you watch this next year. On the whole, I've painted a fairly sunny picture. But there's one thing that Oregonians know. It's going to rain sooner or later. Yes, times are getting better, and they're good. But now is not the time to be complacent and kick back and enjoy the sunshine while it lasts. There is no better time than right now to start thinking and planning for the future, to get ready for that next big storm. I recently met David Walker, the head of the Government Accounting Office in Washington, D.C. Not long ago, he stood at this podium and warned us about the country's financial disaster, that we are on the brink of financial disaster. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid are all in crisis. With a quarter of Oregon's budget coming from the federal government, our problems are only being exacerbated by short-term, short-sighted decision-making in Washington, D.C. And, as we just witnessed in January, as the baby boomers begin to retire, it's only going to get worse. We're bankrupting our country, and that is pushing our state into a danger zone. For example, the dwindling federal funding is contributing to this huge hole we've been reading about in the Oregon Department of Human Services. A decrease in federal student loans works directly against students in Oregon and our economic future. At the same time, we, America and Oregon, are operating in an increasingly complex global marketplace. Like the New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman says in his recent bestseller, "The world is flat." As technology and political forces converge in more and more powerful ways, the differences between geography mean less and less to competition and collaboration. Consider how technology has reshaped every aspect of our lives. I'll tell you a personal story. In the early 1990s, my wife and I had the opportunity to travel to Israel, and we were backpacking up in the Golan Heights. Recently, I got to return to the Golan Heights in Israel. In many ways, nothing had changed. The scenery is the same. It's a vast open area in the northern part of Israel. But this time, I had my trio with me. And I was reading my emails from my staff and badgering them about something halfway around the world. That is change. And I can only imagine what the next 10 years is going to bring for all of us. The world truly has become flat. So is Oregon primed to play in this new world? Can we meet the challenges predicted by David Walker and Thomas Friedman? Are we ready to compete in this global economy? And more importantly, win? Frankly, past discussions in this state have shackled us, taking away our freedom and flexibility to make our own choices and to shape our own destiny. We're failing to face up to the realities of the future, routinely planning only out 2 years, failing to seize that opportunity to take action for the long term. Tax measures 5 and 47 promise relief to taxpayers, but they've been monsters and ravaged our public school system. As a result, we've now taken powers away from local communities to invest in their own schools and have turned that authority over to Salem. We've shifted the decision-making from the people to the special interest in Salem. We've shortchanged ourselves and have left the legislature to confront painful choices between education, public safety, health, and other services that our citizens need. We hear now talk of further limiting the state government. That is, putting a cap on growth in government and investments. I say we cannot do that again, and we must not. Thank you. I'll tell you the smartest long-term investment that we can make if we want to build a future that I believe we all want. And no, I'm not talking about Google stock, although they've done incredibly well. I'm talking about our children. I'm talking about reinvesting in education into our neighborhood schools. In a recent conversation that I did have with Alan Greenspan, I asked him a very simple question. I said, what can we as states do to compete in this global economy? His answer was equally simple: education. There's no question that Oregon schools have suffered over the last 10 to 15 years. We've gone through devastating teacher cuts. We've seen class sizes swell. We've also watched PE, the arts, and music be decimated in our local schools. And there's this public perception out there that we're spending more on schools or that districts are fat. I'll tell you, districts have already cut their budgets to the bone. And if you look at it, we're spending $600 less per child today than we were more than a decade ago on their education. My family's experienced this self-destruction firsthand. We've got 3 children in Portland Public Schools. My wife, Julia, who is here today, served on the school board during some of the toughest times and had to make agonizing decisions. But I tell you, this crisis is affecting the entire state. Whether you're a large district, small district, urban or rural, it is impacting all of us. We need to make a serious investment in our schools. No more lip service from Salem about how important education is and then turn around and say, but we can't do any more for you. We can and we must. You know, sometimes people ask me for hot stock tips, what should they be buying? And I've got one for you, and in fact, it's at the back of the room. It's the Oregon College Savings Plan. This is something that we've seen parents throughout the state invest in, and if you're a parent or if you're not a parent, you all know what's happened to schools in this state. The cost of tuition have skyrocketed. Now it costs about $16,000 to go to a public university in Oregon, more than $40,000 a year, again, for private tuition. And the College Savings Plan has offered a very sound investment for families with tax benefits to help them save for college. And as was mentioned, when I was a state legislator, I helped shepherd this idea through, and now as state treasurer, I get to oversee and manage that. It is truly one of my proudest moments. This plan currently has more than 75,000 families in it, and nearly $600 million has been entrusted in it. This return on this type of investment, though, is both for the individual and for Oregon. Advanced education and higher earning potential is great for that person, but it's also good for our communities and our economy. In fact, I've got some brochures, as I mentioned, in the back. I hope I was unable to put them on your table. I was told there's some rules about that, but you can pick them up on the way out. Truly, it's a great tip. It's been phenomenally successful, not only here in Oregon, but across the country as a way for people to save and help plan for these skyrocketing tuitions. As a state as well, we need a plan. We need at least a 10-year, if not a 20-year plan about a targeted investment in our educational system. We already have that blueprint. It's called the Oregon Quality Education Model. I'm talking about making investments in things such as early childhood education, smaller class sizes, literacy, and a longer school year. The state spends billions of dollars operating our schools, but not one dime into building them. I believe the state needs to step up and help districts build and modernize our schools. Now, you may be asking, why am I up here just talking about education? Why is the state treasurer so concerned about education? Well, one of my main priorities has been education, and it needs to be a top priority for every one of us. And why is that? Well, by increasing our commitment to education, we're directly investing in our competitiveness in this flattening world, and not to mention our quality of life. I believe in setting high standards, and that we need to make sure every student that graduates from high school has the skills and ability to either enter the workforce or go on to college. Remember, it's the state's budget that runs on income tax revenues. If we're able to create and attract better jobs in the future by developing a trained, intelligent, highly skilled workforce, Oregon will ultimately have a bigger pot of money to make investments in safer neighborhoods, human services, and of course, our schools. Now, I have some ideas in the short and the long term how we finance these major investments. First, we need to stabilize school funding. We whacked hundreds of millions of dollars out of the school budget during this last recession. That can never happen again. And during this, over the intervening last couple of years, I was able to help create the first rainy day fund for our schools. Now, we need to build it up. We need to make sure it's big enough when we need it, because we're definitely going to be needing it. And this is a big one. We need to look at fundamental tax reform in this state to diversify school funding and increase local control over the dollars that schools want to spend and invest in their children. I'll give you an example. I don't like the kicker. Wall Street doesn't like the kicker. We need to re-examine this policy and do away with at least the corporate kicker. That's $100 million. Thank you. That's at least $100 million we could have used now to fund this rainy day fund or to make some other good, solid, long-term investments in the state of Oregon. We also need to look at some other tough issues in this state. We need to look harder at the lottery. We cut retail commissions last year, but not enough. We're leaving millions of dollars on the table. Remember, we created the lottery for Oregon, even for schools, not as a subsidy for bars and restaurants. We need to take action, like pooling the school health care program under the state's plan, and, raising the corporate income tax from the $10 that, if you know, was established in 1931. To get these things accomplished, the legislature needs to meet annually instead of every 2 years. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Why give them twice the time to do twice the damage? Well, I got to say, I have a lot of respect for our state legislators and lawmakers. I was one, and I know how hard they work. But I actually want them to work even harder. I think they have to meet annually. That will allow them to better run this multi-billion-dollar organization we call Oregon in this global economy. That will not only serve Oregon in the short term, but serve us well in the long term. There's some tough decisions at the local level, too. Here in Portland, we're looking at the impact on schools of the expiring of that local property tax, temporary income tax for schools and social services. And I'll take my shot at this to throw in a plug for the work done by Mayor Tom Potter and the school advocacy groups. Portland can't sacrifice today's students waiting for the legislature to act. The Portland plan is shaping up to be a reasonable solution and a promising investment in our local schools, and I hope that you will join me in supporting that effort. So how are we going to make this all happen? Well, in many ways, Oregon is well positioned. We're relatively small, so we're nimble and able to confront challenging and changing circumstances. We have a well-educated population. We are already home to global giants like Nike and Intel. We are strategically located against the Pacific Rim, and as I said earlier, our economy is rebounding. But do we have what it takes to rise above today's circumstances and face up to the challenges of tomorrow? We need to figure out what we want for Oregon and then figure out how we're going to achieve it. This gubernatorial year is a great place to start that debate. If we want to become a backwater state with mediocre schools and a so-so quality of life, I think we're on the right track. But I don't think that's what Oregonians want. I know it's not what I want, not for me, not for my children, and not for my children's children. If we want a future that keeps Oregon competitive in this new, flat world, we need to put responsible long-term policies in place and scrap the ones that have led us to the brink of vulnerability. You know, as I've traveled around the state of Oregon, every once in a while I get a chance to ask this question to a group. how many people would like to see tax reform in Oregon? And usually a majority of hands go up. So the question I see is, why aren't we looking at these issues? Why, more importantly, why aren't we taking those actions? Where's the Oregon that had that foresight to protect the rugged beaches, that became a model for smart urban planning, and is regarded as an innovator in healthcare? We can't allow this debate to be between Republicans and Democrats, urban and rural, or whatever label we want to put on people. We cannot do that. We need to look at the big issues as we look at them at the state treasury when we make our investments, looking both in the short and the long term. We need leadership in Salem, yes, but we also need leadership from the business community. We also need leadership from every citizen in this state. More importantly, we need leadership from everyone in this room, each one of you. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves, and I hope that you're ready to join me. This Monday is the Oregon Leadership Summit, which brings together many state elected officials and, perhaps more importantly, hundreds of business leaders throughout Oregon to have a discussion about these big picture issues. Let's go into that with a new attitude, a fresh mindset. Let's not just talk and let our words go on. We need to have action, because in the end, our actions are the measure of our progress. This state takes great pride in being a maverick, sometimes having a cantankerous drive and spirit. Let's reconnect to that legacy. Then we will move forward, knowing that guided by our fundamental principles of intelligence and integrity, and with our eye on the future, we will prosper. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer Edwards. We'll now open the floor to questions. Questions are a privilege of City Club membership, so questions should be asked by City Club members only. We have 2 microphones on either side here. Our first question will be asked by our board host, Ron Paul. Ron is a member of the Board of Governors and our issue committee liaison. He spent 2 decades as a chef and restaurateur, and then as chief of staff to then Commissioner Charlie Hales, he began the effort to develop a year-round food-focused public market in Portland. In the Bureau of Planning for the past 2 years, Ron continues to advocate for a public market as well as citywide arts and culture planning. Ron?
Hey, Ron. Good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you, Randall.
Thank you.
You talked about being bold, strategic, and decisive. Recent reputable economic studies have looked at the value of investing in the local economy is roughly 3x sending money and investments out of state. Austin, Texas, Andersonville, a section of Chicago, clearly demonstrated that. If you look at your examples of the multitasking in Monument or the high-tech investments that you're doing locally, is that adequate? And if you did 3x what you're doing now, how would that differentially impact Oregon's economy?
As Ron told me, the first question was going to be the toughest. Actually, we are putting a lot of money into the state of Oregon, not only through the state treasury, but also through other agencies like the Department of Transportation is making a major investment in our roads, $1 billion plus. That is also going to create jobs in the short and the long term and making sure we have a vital economic activity in the state. Investing in Oregon is smart. We now are committed to putting over $100 million through our pension fund into companies throughout Oregon and Washington, because we're finding that money flows both ways. I'd like to work more closely with Washington to get them to be more of a strategic partner in investing their money in Oregon as well. So we are doing what we can. We believe Oregon's a great investment, and that 3x is what we try to achieve all the time. Thank you. Yes.
Chris Allman, City Club member.
Hey, Chris.
First, I want to thank you very much for all your emphasis on education and the solutions that you are subscribing to. My question has to do with your suggestions that the state should be taking more efforts in helping build schools. My kids go to the Beaverton School District and are foregoing a local option levy to help supplement educational costs. What are your thoughts regarding that? How do you envision that kind of thinking?
The idea that I see is that the state literally has to put money on the table and help share the cost of building those schools in Beaverton and around the state. Whether you're fast growing or you're here in Portland or on the coast where you have a lot of older schools, the state has an interest in investing in those schools, both for safety, but also to make sure students have access to the best technology, for example. Many of our schools are antiquated. So what I'm looking is that the state would ultimately set up, like Washington has, a matching grant program where we sell bonds, the state would sell bonds to match local investment through their bonds to lower the burden that local taxpayers having to pay, and the state would share in that. That's the idea. We need to be making these long-term investments in this infrastructure. We're not doing a thing right now. Thank you. Sir?
Hi, my name is Gavin White. I'm both a member of the City Club and the chair of the Multnomah County Democratic Party. I could talk at great length about how much I appreciate the things you've said today, but I won't.
Well, I don't know if I should thank you or not for that.
Some other time, perhaps.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear you speak also about the use of public-private partnerships. In light of things you've said about the need for local decision-making, smart urban planning, and educational opportunities, the example that comes to my mind right now is the Tryon Life Community Farm. They're leveraging public funds with generous community support to create a sustainability education center in Southwest Portland. What impact do public-private partnerships such as this have on our economy and our bond rating?
Well, let me just say, public-private partnerships are how we operate in the Treasury. We go out and hire the private sector to do most of our investing. We hire the experts, so that way we get the best and the brightest that work on your behalf. I think public-private partnerships have worked in many, many areas, and the public doesn't always see them. Affordable housing is a great example. You bring private interests, public interests together, they build affordable housing, and we've been very involved in helping make sure that that is done as aggressively as possible in the state of Oregon. Those are the things that Wall Street does like to see, where the state is leveraging its money with other private sector entities and public sector. So it's a good thing. We're going to continue to do it, and we do a lot of it. Thank you.
Hi, Randall, Jane C., City Club member. I think that what may break us all, business, government, individuals, is the cost of this stupid healthcare system that we have. The way we're doing it is just the most expensive way that there is. It's just crazy. So when you talk to Greenspans and Wall Street people and other treasurers, is there anything that you guys talk about that can push toward some sort of healthcare reform so it can be widespread and affordable?
Well, I think you've hit on a topic that this country really has to come to grips with, and this is not an issue just for government. This is a big issue in the private sector as well. So those forces have to come together and say, we've got to make a change. The funny thing is about Greenspan, somebody else asked him that same question, and he said, we have got to figure out a way to make healthcare more affordable in this country. It's hurting us badly. And of course, as we just said earlier, the population's aging. So this is only going to get more and more expensive for both the public and the private sector.
So what are you doing about it?
So what am I doing about it? Well, I'll be the first to admit I'm not an expert on healthcare finance. It's an extremely complicated area, but I do think we have got to look at being smart with both the private and the public sector in finding those solutions that work for both of us. And I know there's a lot of discussion about nationally how we approach this, locally how we approach this, and as I mentioned in my remarks, Oregon has been seen as a leader in providing health care, particularly to the poor in this state.
Jonathan Hart, City Club member. Mr. Edwards, many of us are going to be getting to the age where we stop contributing to our 401ks in the next few years and we start drawing off of them. do you see this as a significant element to the change in the way Market Street, Market Street works, or Wall Street works, or, and if so, how is that going to be addressed by Oregon Treasury?
Yeah, this demographic change that's occurring in this country and in this state is going to have an impact, I think, both on Wall Street and how they're looking at the long term, who's going to be investing. You're right, there's going to be people pulling money out, maybe at a greater rate than it's being put in. I think what you're seeing is a lot of anticipation of what that's going to look like. One I've heard the solution, and it's probably not the greatest one of the solutions to Social Security is people are going to work longer. They're not going to be pulling off Social Security. They're not going to be pulling their money out of their 401ks because, as Jane just said, healthcare costs got so expensive they can't afford to, quote, retire and try to pay their health insurance premiums. They're going to have to continue to work. I don't think that's a solution in and of itself, but it probably is going to be a reality for a lot of people. Thank you. Yes.
Treasurer Edwards, Mark Anderson, City Club member. My question is going to be on the revenue side. Many blue ribbon committees, including many from the City Club here, have looked at the revenue side. I'm sure the Wall Street folks also look at that as they look at bond ratings and everything else. So why aren't Oregonians doing more about getting revenue off of consumption? We do it for gasoline. Many communities do it for hotel rooms. What is so wrong about a sales tax, and wouldn't that help us actually borrow money at cheaper rates because we'd have a more stable revenue base for our public monies?
You raised that third rail question in Oregon politics. You know, it's interesting, Wall Street, when they look at Oregon, and this really is what confuses them. They see Oregon, they see an income tax-based system, and we just watched over 2 years ago what happened to that system. It crashed. In fact, our revenue stream crashed as fast as any in the country. So we're riding this roller coaster up and down that's even going higher and lower. And then you throw the kicker on, which from their viewpoint, which is a true viewpoint, we have no ability to take any of the upside revenues that come in and put them away for when we go down. So we watched what happened in their couple of years ago when this budget crashed. We saw the legislature meet 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 special sessions and chasing this proverbial downhill slope. I think as long as we've got that volatility, we better have a rainy day fund that's going to work in the short and the long term. The issue that you're raising, though, about our tax system, I mean, look, I'm the state treasurer. One of the ways we make money is we diversify, right? Stocks go up, bonds go down, real estate, it's an interplay. We should, as a state, realize that now we've hooked our school system onto the same roller coaster, which it wasn't that way before ballot measure 5. And I think that connection is the one that people are starting to see, well, why are my local schools going this way, even though maybe revenues are going this way in the state? It doesn't make sense. And I think you start to have that conversation with the public and understand that, as I'm describing, the educational system has to be funded, and it has to be funded at a more adequate level than we are today, looking to the long term. It will pay dividends to them and the future generations. I think if you can get that connection, I think then people will start to see we've got some major problems with our tax system.
Great. I'm going to do the Jane Cease follow-up. So
Okay.
what will you be doing to help Oregonians see that and realize that they need to do something on the revenue side?
Well, the great privilege I have as state treasurer is I can go around the state and people will listen to me, which is great. And I have, ever since I've been in office, talked about this tax system that we have and the impact it's having on my job. That downgrade that we saw in the state's credit affected my job directly. It affected every taxpayer in this state. And it was in part because of the thing I just described. No plan, no savings, a tax system that's become more vulnerable and volatile, and we crashed. I really didn't have a great answer to tell Wall Street why that happened. What I want us to do is pick up the pieces from that, understand the situation and the challenges we just confronted, and look up and say, how are we going to not have that happen again? We cannot have, as we saw, hundreds of millions of dollars taken out of our school system. You know, you can only educate a child once. And if we're pulling money out, there's only one thing that can happen. The quality of that education is going to go down, and that's going to impact all of us. Sir.
I'm Dick Roy, a City Club member. Underlying your comments are strategies that we should invest, we should train our children and so forth to be winners in the global economy. Critics of the global economy would say that the capital markets of the world are ramping up systems of degradation of the Earth's natural systems, creating monocultures of consumerism, driving wages down, and so that we have embraced a structure that is not only degrading the Earth and dehumanizing people, but also will certainly fail. Have you considered the alternative of policies of localization as a philosophical matter as opposed to blindly embracing the global economy?
Well, I appreciate that question because that is the debate out there, right? Can we survive and live basically within our own natural borders here in this country, or are the natural borders the globe? I think what's changed, and I try to cite that in my remarks, is with this little device. I mean, we now can take a picture and beam it anywhere in the world at any time. That wasn't the case, 5 or 6 years ago. The internet has dramatically changed this ability for businesses, people to communicate. So therefore, you can't ignore this technology, and it's going to continue to keep changing the way in which people interact with one another. I actually think that's a positive. Having traveled, had that opportunity to travel in other parts of the world, there are many places in this world where their economic standards are so low that unless they somehow can become more energized and connected to this economy, they're going to continue to be pushed to the back. And I think that's a critical thing that Bono keeps talking about with Africa. Why is Africa suffering as a continent? He wants to bring a focus nationally, internationally, that we've got to make a change there. Bring them into this economy, help them raise their boats so that they do better. Yes.
Roberta Palmer, City Club member. Mr. Edwards, getting back to the sales tax, Oregon likes to do things differently, and I wonder if you could speak to different consumption taxes, such as the goods and services tax, the value-added tax, the advantages they have, and why they are never considered.
Actually, there have been a few proposals of late that did include a value-added tax. I think 2 sessions ago, I'm losing track of sessions. With all those special sessions, they all kind of blur into one. But I know there was a bipartisan effort in the Senate to look at a broader tax, including a sales tax, a lowering of the personal income tax. It didn't get out of the session, but as a result, there was a discussion about what we should do with our tax system, including looking at the tax breaks that we give. That's a whole other part of the ledger that I think has to be put on the table as you look at the tax system in Oregon. Again, I think the bottom line is this. The public has to understand what they're going to buy with their tax system, what that investment's going to give to them, and I truly believe they will respond. I've seen it. I've seen it here in Portland. When we saw a crisis facing our schools 3 years ago, the taxpayers in this region stepped up and said, we don't want that to happen. Yes?
Chris Smith, City Club member. I'm going to give you the opportunity to give the City of Portland some advice. In Portland, we have a pay-as-you-go system for our police and fire pension system. City Council is now looking at whether that should be converted to a pre-funded system, and that's being studied by an independent review commission and by City Club as well. So with all those people looking at that question, do you have any advice about whether we should convert, and perhaps more importantly, if we convert, how to manage the transition from pay-as-you-go to pre-funded?
Well, that's why I brought my staff here today. In fact, I'd like them to stand up. Would you please stand up? These are the folks who make it all happen at the State Treasury. Please. Thank you. You're raising a very serious question, which is how is Portland going to keep managing this pay-as-you-go system? I think that commission that came out really started to highlight some of the changes that probably are going to need to be made. I don't know what the legislature is going to be asked to do, and maybe my office through the PERS fund as far as helping them make that transition. I don't really know the specifics. I haven't followed it that closely, but it seems apparent that there's something that's going to change there. Great. Thank you very much.
We're adjourned.